This week on Enemy Sidelines, presented by Microsoft Teams, our guest is Wes Hodkiewicz. He covers the Green Bay Packers for the team. Always a pleasure speaking with you, Wes. How's it going up in Green Bay? I know it's not the week that y'all expected coming in undefeated, but first loss of the season. What's the mood like in Green Bay?
Yeah, DP, I think the big thing right now is these guys trying to balance a really strong start. Offensively, we're off to such a huge season. I mean, we're talking historic type proportions, which a lot of teams in the NFL are right now. And then balancing that with the setback against a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where other than that first quarter, nothing really seemed to go right for Green Bay. So the big message that Matt LaFleur has been preaching to the locker room this week is that while it was disappointing and you have to learn from this and you got to figure out what went wrong in those last three quarters, you also need to make sure that you do what's right this week to not let it go against you this Sunday against a Houston Texans team. And you know this better than anybody. It's a lot better than what their record says considering the opponents that they face. Green Bay's taking nothing for granted. They know this is going to be a challenge.
So Aaron Rodgers, he threw his first pick six. I mean, that's something he rarely does against Tampa Bay. And it seemed like things sort of downward spiraled from there. How does a guy like Aaron Rodgers bounce back after something like that? And what was he saying after the game?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. He's 15 years, 12, 13 seasons now as a starter. That was his third pick six of his career. Just so happens that was the second one, though, against Tampa Bay. It happened to him back in 2009 as well. But back-to-back series, he had not thrown an INT this season until that game. And obviously, everything sort of rolled against them. But historically, if you look at Rodgers, I mean, when he's had a down performance, he's typically bounced back in a big way the next week. Even Green Bay underneath Matt LaFleur last season, other than obviously the NFC Championship game loss, they came back the next week after a loss and had a victory. So Rodgers, I think the major message that he was trying to send after the game is he looks at it as an anomaly. You know, things did not go their way. They had a couple different things that were working against them offensively and, you know, just weren't able to find their rhythm and really establish any kind of, you know, sustainable offense. They had 1 3-and-out through the first 4 games of the season. They had like 6 or 7 of them against Tampa Bay. So a very good defense, and they're trying to learn their lesson, and Rodgers is trying to be better now going into this game against the Texans.
Well, it's year 16 for Aaron Rodgers, and he was off to a very hot start, minus the 2 interceptions in the loss to Tampa Bay. He had 13 touchdowns for the season, 109.7 passer rating, which according to Next Gen Stats powered by AWS is the 5th best in the NFL. So what's year 2 like for him under Matt LaFleur? We were up there in Green Bay for joint practices last year. We're very familiar with Matt LaFleur down here in Houston. He spent some time here with the Texans, but it seemed like it got off to a rocky start, but the two are really meshing together well. So how has that chemistry really developed, and how are the two working together?
Yeah, it's developed in a big way, DP. I mean, this is something where you look at where they were last year when Matt LaFleur was trying to implement his style of offense, his terminology, and meshing it with what Aaron Rodgers did well for so long in Mike McCarthy's system. That took time to really get it sort of streamlined and making sure that the personnel fit the vision of what LaFleur wanted to do. This offseason, they took the virtual offseason program extremely serious. When some teams were trying to figure out, okay, do we even do anything on Zoom? Do we just come back for training camp? LaFleur made it known right away. He wanted to make sure that they did whatever they could to get guys in the classroom, understanding the system and the concepts. And they started off fast in training camp. It was a lot smoother than I expected. And they really shot out of the gate, too, in that game against Minnesota. So I think you're blending the concepts of what LaFleur does so well, the pre-snap motions, bunch formations, building stuff off the run and setting up big plays downfield with the passing game, with a lot of the things that Rodgers does well in his ability to sort of decipher what's happening at the line of scrimmage and make those kind of adjustments. It's been a really good marriage so far. They've had to go through a lot of different injuries and personnel offensively, but I think because of how good the scheme has really been tailored to what Rodgers wants to do, they've been able to persevere through it up until, of course, that game against Tampa Bay.
Well, Davante Adams, we all know what he can do up there for Green Bay. He's coming off such a big season in 2019, and it seems like 2020 is headed in the same direction for him. What makes him such a go-to target and so hard to cover for defenses?
Just that sixth sense that he has with Rodgers. I mean, he's a guy that developed underneath Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, now with the Texans. And some of those veterans, a very close friend of James Jones, a longtime Packers receiver, he understood what it is required of receivers in this offense to not only make plays, but really be able to stay on the same page with Rodgers at all times. And he's developed in that system, and he's grown in it. And he's become a 3-time Pro Bowl receiver now. But the real big X factor for him, and you can ask anybody at the league level, is just how good his footwork is and his fundamentals. I mean, there is just something about the way that he can beat guys off the line of scrimmage and create separation for himself that is just out of this world. He is a master of the entire route tree. And I think when he's healthy, and now certainly he's been working through a little bit of a hamstring tweak, but when he's healthy, I mean, you're looking at one of the top 10, top 5 receivers in this league right now, and Rodgers trusts him wholeheartedly. Last week, they were trying to get back on the same page after Adams missed 2 games, and then obviously the bye week. But, 6 catches, 60 yards, I think that gave them sort of a building block for what they want to try to do now moving forward, because he's a huge part of what this offense wants to do.
Well, in the offseason, it seemed like the Packers were really relying on free agent Devin Funchess to get back there behind Davante Adams. They didn't draft a wide receiver in a pretty wide receiver heavy draft. So then Funchess goes out, opts out of the 2020 season due to COVID. What does the wide receiver group look like behind Davante Adams? How challenging was that for the offense to sort of compensate for the loss of a free agent that they thought was going to be a pretty big part of this offense?
Yeah, the Devin Funchess thing, I think, took a lot of people by surprise. But if you understand, where he's coming from and what is exactly how that's affected his family, it made a lot of sense for his decision to step away this year, wants to get his career back going in 2021, a guy that the Packers were really excited about. What they did instead, though, is they looked inside. I mean, this was a decision that was made on the eve of training camp, so it became a lot of Davante Adams again, but also Allen Lazard, who is a receiver that you probably won't be seeing on Sunday. He's dealing with a core muscle injury after a game in which he had 146 receiving yards and a touchdown against the New Orleans Saints. So Lazard really grabbed that number 2 role, and he didn't relinquish it in camp. Rodgers, again, another guy that he really trusts. But beyond that, it's come down to really making the most out of the other skill positions. I mean, certainly they still have receivers there that he likes and that can help this offense. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, the 5th-round pick from 2018, is a big over-the-top target and a guy that could threaten that next level of the defense. But it's also fallen on Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams to be parts of this passing game. Robert Tonyan, the 3rd-year tight end, former receiver that they converted to that tight end spot, he's become the number 1 target there. And also, we'll have to see whether or not he's actually on the field, but former Houston Texan Tyler Ervin has been a big part of what they do with their pre-snap motions, kind of a tweener player, can do both the receiver stuff. He's with the receivers in that room, but he's technically also a running back. So they've just had to rely on more pieces because it just hasn't been, those 1 or 2, 3 type veteran players that were always so prominent in Mike McCarthy's offenses.
Yeah, Tyler Ervin's certainly a Swiss Army knife. We knew what he could do here. Just health seemingly an issue for him always. You mentioned the run game, so let's talk about that. Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, they both out there, adding to the ground game for the Packers. How are they different in their skill sets, and how do they like to use them along with the passing game?
Like last year, you saw it so much with how they both grew in Matt LaFleur's system, but they grew in different ways. I mean, these are guys that are best friends off the field. They both came in the 2017 draft 1 round after each other, and they share the same agent, Lee Steinberg and Chris Cabot. So they've known each other for 4 years, and just seeing how their relationship has flourished, it's a 1-2 combination that you're very rarely going to see in the National Football League, and they're just really totally different running backs. Aaron Jones is the one that has gotten a lot of acclaim just because of, what he can do and how shifty he is, and there's always a big play that's potentially there for him to make. But Jamal Williams is one of the most well-rounded running backs I've ever covered. And if it wasn't really for Aaron Jones being drafted a year after him in 2017, this is a guy that could have really easily been a bell cow for this offense. He's a power back. He made it a point this year to get leaner. He dropped about 10 pounds. He improved his route running. He had a career-high 95 receiving yards before the bye week against Atlanta. So they'll use both of those guys at any given time. When Ervin was missing in this game against Tampa Bay, they were using Aaron Jones in the pre-snap motions. They also drafted 2nd-round pick A.J. Dillon that they're trying to get involved in the offense more too. So Matt LaFleur comes from that Kyle Shanahan, Mike Shanahan coaching tree. They like getting multiple running backs involved. They like being able to keep Aaron Jones healthy and really fresh for the 4th quarter. So they're going to rely on a lot of different backs to get them not only through this game against the Texans, but the entire season. And that's why, at least during my time on the beat, this is definitely the deepest that they've been at that position.
All right, well, let's talk about the Packers defense. It's hard to get a gauge on what their identity is on the field. They're sort of in the middle of the pack against the pass, against the run. They sort of struggle in the takeaway department, much like the Texans. They've only had 3 for the season, even though Aaron Rodgers has been pretty clean. The Texans have put up just maybe a little bit, maybe 4 on the season, and that only got going in the last few weeks. So tell me about this Packers defense. Where do they struggle? Where are they looking to improve? And what are some of the surprises of them that you've seen so far?
Well, really, the biggest surprise is the fact they have struggled to take the football away. That was one of the big hallmarks last year. They had an up and down season against the run. Certainly, the NFC title game against San Francisco was sort of the culmination of that. But they had a lot of different playmakers in the secondary and the second level that were able to take the ball away. And then Zadarius Smith really arrived, their big offseason acquisition in 2019, as one of the top young pass rushers in this league. Preston Smith, who was also signed, had 12 sacks as well. So both of those guys together combined for over 25 sacks last year, and it's just been a little bit more of a struggle getting particularly Preston going here during the first 5 games, only a half of a sack. Zadarius Smith, before the bye week, was actually the NFC Defensive Player of the Week, second time he's earned that honor during his career, a guy that they'll move around everywhere. He plays sort of a rover position at times in Mike Pettine's defense. I mean, he's the guy that as this defense goes, he goes. And that's really, last week, not being able to get a sack of Tom Brady, that was sort of the beginning of the end there, just not being able to get enough pressure on him. When the pressure is going and they get offenses into 3rd and long situations, that's where this unit is really at its best. So they've had to work through some injuries. Kenny Clark, who they re-signed before the season, a big part of this defense, plays over 80% of the snaps the last 2 years. Their nose tackle went to the Pro Bowl a year ago. He missed basically all but the first 15 snaps of the season due to a groin issue. He came back this past week, still trying to get back into his own rhythm. And then lastly, just to touch on it, Jair Alexander, who was their first-round pick, the first draft pick that general manager Brian Gutekunst made in his position in 2018. He's quickly climbing the charts as one of the top young corners in this league. So they definitely have playmakers. It's just been a matter of trying to make sure that they can, take the football away and at certain points and important intervals of the game really come up with that big play that they've been missing.
Well, Randall Cobb will face Aaron Rodgers for the first time as a Houston Texan. I know that you've covered the Packers for a number of years. So tell me a little bit about Randall Cobb. We've seen obviously what he can do as a slot receiver for the Texans, but what really impressed you about Cobb in the years that you were able to cover him?
His steadiness, and he's a guy that he's never going to get too high or too low about anything. And I got a chance to cover him in 2014, the year that he had the 1,200-yard season. And you talk about trust, as I mentioned, with Rodgers and his receivers. I mean, when Jordy Nelson and Cobb were both in their prime and that season together, I mean, it was just poetry in motion watching those two guys play off of each other. He's battled some injuries, but I mean, go back to the end of the 18 season, and that was when his contract was coming up. I'll never forget it, December 30th, 2018. Rodgers, there's this great photo of him and Cobb with their arms locked and both of those guys crying because of just what they meant to each other and kind of understanding that was going to be his last chapter in Green Bay. Obviously came back and had a really healthy, successful year with Dallas, was rewarded with the contract with the Texans. So he does a little bit of everything. But as you said, I mean, underneath, as tough as receivers come and being able to, kind of get him going was always so huge for this offense. When Randall Cobb was healthy and right, I mean, there were some incredible memories that he created in Green Bay.
All right, well, looking forward to the matchup on Sunday, Wes, as always. Green Bay Packers at the Houston Texans, Sunday noon kickoff right here in Houston. Thanks so much for the time, Wes, and we'll talk soon.
All right, thanks, DP.